Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 2. Chapter 9. The door to the turbolift had just swiveled itself into position with a hiss of finality as Deputy Director Walker Audenhound shifted his gaze down upon his boots. Spotless and shining with an almost supernatural luster, the boots' appearance betrayed their age by decades. A chime whistled in the pod, alerting Audenhound that he had not yet assigned it a duty. 77, he declared, lifting his head needlessly as he clasped his hands behind him. There wasn't a shred of nervousness within him as he stared blankly at the pod's wall before him, a thought that felt odd. Although he had held Yularen in extremely high respect, he all but worshipped the current director. The pod ended its journey surprisingly fast, it seemed, and let forth another brief hiss as the door rotated out of the way. He stepped into the corridor, blankly responsive to his surroundings, still pondering his thoughts. He assessed the nature of his current order and how it had only come about after amalgamating his findings. A conclusion he would have come to in any event, taken from him as fast as it had been displayed. The director would, at the very least, explain his decision. In detail he knew, but Audenhound could not shake the feeling that something was indeed amiss. He continued his long strides down the corridor to the director's suite of offices, wondering to himself just how old the new interim director was as he reached the doorway to the outer offices, a duo of black armored troopers standing at either side. "Code cylinder, sir," the trooper on Walker's right pleasantly demanded with an outstretched hand, his voice an odd variation of modulated tones. Audenhound neither hesitated to reach for his upper breast pocket for the cylinder nor changed his facial expression as he let his cold, steely eyes do their best to penetrate the trooper's visor. He slowly turned his head to shred the second trooper in that gaze as he dropped the cylinder into the first trooper's waiting hand. The man had to be what, 80, 81? He continued his earlier thought as his cylinder was returned to him. "Cleared to proceed, sir." The odd, modulated warbling from the trooper informed him as the doorway opened without a sound. A vibrant maroon carpet stretched before him through a large corridor, giving way to a vacuous office some meters distant. Audenhound pocketed his cylinder and strode forward, focusing on the solitary figure standing at the office's far end with a hand upon the back of the high chair. With his long strides, it didn't take him long to reach the corridor's end, so he pulled up his pace and locked his arms behind his back. The figure hadn't moved, continuing to stare out the extensive curved transparisteel framework. The man's hairless head reflected the light of passing speeders and cabs, adding their bustle to the chaos of Coruscant. Walker watched as the man clenched his hand over the top of the high-backed chair, supporting his physical turn from the views outside. "Walker, my boots are old, as am I. 83 years the Maker has graced me with the privilege to breathe this fine air," came the dry voice, sounding ancient yet full of vibrant life. The authority within the voice hadn't wavered one bit. Audenhound was stunned momentarily to hear the man who had ushered him into his career address his very thought not moments before. "Sir, you don't look a day over 60, Audenhound responded. "First, let's keep lies within the halls of politics, and second, to hell with formalities. We've both served far too long to remember all the regulations in any case," the director said with a slight chuckle. It turned into an irritating light cough. Walker approaching momentarily with a raised hand out of concern. The director waved him off nonchalantly as he gave his chest a slight rapping, an effort to clear his lungs. "Retirement had found me working on a collection of memoirs and the occasional death stick. Stay away from those damn things. And call me Barton, will you, for the love of all we've been through together," he said with a friendly note of finality once his lungs cooperated. "ISB Director Rear Admiral Barton Coburn. That's a mouthful, sir." "Barton," Walker responded with a slight ring of witticism, correcting himself. "Interim. Let us not forget that significant detail. When called to serve, that was my only request," Coburn added, a wry smile cracking his weathered lips as they parted from the pinched expression Audenhound had always associated with the man. The interim director turned to face Walker, adopting an earnest expression that only punctuated the ever-present severe expression. His deep-set eyes folded into their sockets as his furrowing brow brought the time-earned wrinkles into contention with his eyelids and brows. He hobbled slightly as he turned fully, placing his weight on the hand that had yet to leave its place from the high-backed chair. "Forgive me, Walker, but I must sit. Pull up a chair and join me, will you?" Walker Odenholm did as suggested and slid his massive frame into an austere padded seat before the desk, only after the interim director had swung his aged body into place. Physical damnation aside, my mind remains youthful, fortunately. Walker nodded his understanding. "It's a much better alternative than the reverse, Barton," he added, clearly having issues addressing the man by his first name. Although noticing the hesitation, Coburn decided to let the man figure it out for himself. "My apologies for broadcasting your summons to the whole of the complex, Audie. There are just too many buttons on that damn thing. This automated system is less automated than I think it is," he said gruffly, waving his hand toward the comm suite at the left of his desk. "Your work on that case was diligent, timely, and exacting. You aren't here because I take umbrage with how you've handled yourself regarding it, rather the contents of its implications." Appreciative of the man's ability to come to the point so quickly, Walker was slightly stunned at the speed with which the conversation had shifted. Thank you, Barton," he corrected himself right away. Coburn nodded with a quick burst, then continued. "I shut you down for security reasons, Audie. For the integrity of our organization, as well as your own. Lethal has been a question mark for military intelligence, and subsequently for us as well, since the death of Jedi Canon Jarrus. Our Emperor declared it a victory upon his death, but the reality is far from telling upon examination of the details. This I am moderately versed in, Barton. Without any established link to the factories, we cannot secure any classified data within. My team and I have been monitoring shipping activity within that system precisely to that effect." Audenhone, feeling more comfortable in his place, spoke on the subject with anything but moderation. "If any rebellious faction could get those factories up and running again, and that is hardly a firm if, they could easily turn Grand Admiral Thrawn's agenda right back into our faces," Coburn added. "Precisely my point, Barton. Our surveillance is looking specifically for massive fuel shipments with a Lothal terminus." Audenhone responded quickly. "What my assistant and I have surmised, however, is a scenario employed by any factions utilizing alternative means of supplying those factories their needed power. It is not just the defenders that concerns us. They have the build lines to supply numerous types of weapons of war, as well as the skilled labor to do so in quick order. We train them, after all," he finished with a deep inhale of breath. "A point my predecessor brought up on more than one occasion at that." Coburn's expression turned dour, realizing it was why Yularen was on the Death Star in the first place. It would have been wiser to employ Imperial assets toward that end, or place the facilities closer to more heavily armed and guarded systems. But that is unimportant at this point. Coburn felt abashed by steering the conversation toward pointless avenues of conjecture. "The bottom line is simply that our empire will not accept terms in which we would have to secure a planet twice. It displays a weakness that is ultimately focused in our emperor. We cannot subject him to that, nor could we subject ourselves to that." Audenholm nodded in agreement, but shifted in his seat uncomfortably. "Barton, there is a difference between occupation and destruction. We cannot allow those factories to come online under any circumstance." Walker suddenly rose, crossed his arms before his massive chest, and strode toward the view outside. Why didn't his former admiral understand how important this was? He could not shake the thought. "What is happening at Bodajev?" he decided to ask, completely embracing the wash of camaraderie Coburn had insinuated. Could Kane and his forces retake Lothal? He continued without removing his gaze from the chaos of movement outside. He hadn't seen the look of surprise that had pulled the skin higher on the forehead of the older man. "Did I not just make myself clear? Retaking Lothal is off the table, Audie. In the interest of Imperial integrity, call it something else then," Walker said in return. Coburn was quiet for a long moment, tapping his conjoined hands lightly against his chin. He stopped abruptly and pushed himself to his feet, stabilizing the maneuver with both hands atop his desk. "Wait a minute. You're seriously considering obliteration, aren't you?" Audenholm turned from his outward view to face his old friend. And why not? Is it so vastly different than what we've been able to accomplish under Protocol 17? He said more than asked. I am not suggesting a full scale planetary bombardment, Barton, merely a precise strike on the factories. Kane's fleet is in a prime position to do just that. Coburn studied the man before him, his upper lip quivering slightly. His eyes narrowed under the folds of his wrinkles, deep in thought. Audie, have a seat, please. There are a few things you should know. Walker eyed the aged director as if trying to decide the worth of his words, deciding his actions in the past more than solidified Audenhone's trust in him. He dropped his arms to his sides and returned to the chair, an encroaching exasperation beginning to swell within. Audie, take a breath, Coburn said, tortuously lowering himself into his seat with a vivid groan. I am not discounting the validity of your recommendation. Then what, Barton? Walker was becoming agitated as he rose to his feet again. Your investigation was followed, traced, and mirrored outside these walls, Audie. Now shut up, listen, and sit the hell down. Coburn shot out with intense authority, reminding Audenhone specifically why he held the man in such high regard. Walker's breath left him, his heart skipped a beat, and he felt lightheaded. Without hesitation, he fell back into the chair with an audible groan, looking upon the director with eyes wide and mind blank. The trace signal initiated the moment you began exploring that case file, a case that saw the destruction of an Imperial outpost and the loss of a light cruiser in less than 4 minutes. The signal itself, I believe, has yet to terminate. However, it is undetectable within our network. Teams are working on locating it, but we will have to assume for the time being that our protocols and the network itself are compromised. Which brings me to Admiral Kane. Coburn stopped momentarily to let the words sink in while he regained his breath. Buttigieg is a twofold problem, Audie. First, the loss of further assets in this particular case is unacceptable. The resistance to your assignments came from this office, I will not lie. However, there are higher level prescripts that would have negated your actions regardless. His face was flushing a light reddish hue. Audenhone, unsure what was causing it, spent a brief respite wrapping his mind around what had just been said. I am assuming there is an objective I am as of yet unaware of, or at the very least requiring clearance I do not currently possess, he said, voicing his thoughts. Coburn held a finger up in pause, a hand stretched across his chest in a useless effort to regulate his breathing. As that information has made itself need to know in this case, I can proceed by saying yes to both points. Moving forward, neither will be of hindrance. Audenhone, appreciative of the upgrade in confidence, was still patiently waiting for the point. Buttigieg operates freely under the confines of Admiral Kane, with the full support of High Command, mind you. Although he maintains a full attack fleet, it stands at the ready to protect the Imperial interests being manufactured planetside. As you know, we are actively pursuing all leads at our disposal to locate and eliminate all insurgent threats. We are also taking a proactive approach toward preventing our presence from being spread too thin. Protocol 17 provides incredible response time to neutralize these threats, as you know. Still, as mentioned earlier, the proactivity will come by flooding the galaxy with standard and 11 3K Viper probe droids. Coburn paused to breathe again, this time holding his hand up. Audenhone nodded his understanding. It is to that endeavor Kane finds himself currently, while also maintaining the manufacturing capability of the AA-9 freighters within the shipyards themselves. Coburn continued with ragged breath. Barton, take a breath. I understand what you're saying, Walker spoke up to give the aged director a moment to catch his breath, and a moment for himself to digest everything thus far. He could feel the tug of numerous other questions taking form, all related to this conversation. However, they remained elusive in cohesion. He looked at the director as the man regained an even rhythm with his breaths, contemplating the worth of the conversation versus what he already knew. Tell me about Rayada, Barton, Audenhone said, deciding to pursue a conclusion to this meeting. Barton Coburn steered his gaze straight into Walker's steely eyes. The moon is pointless by itself, Audie. It is merely a connection between numerous insurgents and fugitives, the old man began. We have used it to cultivate, but nothing more. Audenhone shook his head slowly. Barton, details are everything here. I can be of no use to you or service to the Empire if I muddle my way through supposition to reach a point you could enlighten me with right here and now, he said with measured deliberateness, a tone he used right before deciding whether he was still interested in a topic. Audenhone watched again as the director seemed to fumble with what he could or could not say, his lips clipping together as if to say something. Then the man did something unexpected. He turned toward the cam to his right and made a subtle motion with his hands. Walker had the immediate impression that he was waiting on a third party to proceed. He pushed himself up again from his seat, shaking his head. With all due respect, sir, there is work to do, if there is nothing more. Audie, for the last time, sit. Coburn turned his head back to face him. I ask for your patience, as I am currently obtaining the clearance you will require for me to proceed with impunity. Audenhone took in all that he could from the man's visage, his posture, bulging eyes, the beads of sweat lining his brow, and the clenching and unclenching of his hands. The man was on edge and nervous, and Walker had no idea why. Within seconds, the door issued forth with a slight hiss at the end of the far corridor. Audenhone turned to observe a heavily robed individual adorned in flamboyant colors, flanked by a stocky Imperial general in dress green and brown leather accents. Grand General Tagge? Walker shifted gears from frustrated annoyance to delighted curiosity. He rose from his seat out of respect for the general and turned his frame into the confined posture with his hands locked behind his back. Barton Coburn appeared from around his desk at Walker's side, the elements of nervousness washed clean from his stance. General, Viceroy, thank you for your prompt response and presence. Perhaps we can bring this to a conclusion in short order. Barton, it's been ages. You look like hell, by the way, the general said with light-hearted sincerity, bringing a rare smile that graced the old man's face with a certain awkwardness. Coburn half turned to Audenhone. Audie, may I intro Grand General Tagge? It is an honor, sir, Walker said quickly, firing a hand out in greeting. Well, Barton, it appears your request is warranted, Tagge said with an awkward smile of his own, the hint of a laugh flowing from his words as he took Audenhone's hand and applied a firm grip. Please let me introduce Viceroy Janus Grijatis. The general motioned toward the second man. Audenhone swiveled to the colorful man, taking in the flashy attire, taking in as much as possible from the man before him without appearing dubious. He noted the bony structure of his face, the sun-starved skin clinging loosely at various points, the man's sunken eyes and dark circles surrounding them looking as if he hadn't slept in weeks. The yellowing stain across his lips informed Walker that the man indulged in pinches of spice in abundance. He decided at that moment that he didn't like that man. Director, Deputy Director, it is a pleasure to meet you both in good health. The Viceroy vomited his greeting, assuring Audenhone that his assessment was correct. Despite his misgivings, he extended his hand in greeting, which the Viceroy merely looked at, his hands folded into the opposing arms of his red and blue robes. Walker retracted his hand and turned his focus to the general, deciding to ignore the arrogant man completely. If we could convene and find a conclusion to this briefing, I would be eternally grateful. Coburn perked up, sidling back toward his seat. The newcomers moved to occupy the seats before the director's desk, and the emaciated Grijatis took the seat Audenhone had occupied. Without betraying his frustration, Walker slid over another chair from against the wall. Assurities that we are off the grid, gentlemen, as Barton has already informed us, the integrity of the Imperial network is quite possibly compromised, General Tagge spoke up, adopting a tone of authority but retaining the spirited look in his eyes. Walker noticed the man's forehead extend farther back into his receding hairline. It is to that end we feel it appropriate to elevate your clearance level to give you all the information you'll need, Tagge finished without taking a breath, which was very different from the last 15 minutes of conversation with the director. We are secure, Grand General, Barton responded in a clipped tone, Walker noticing the difference in the man's dialogue with the general. The Viceroy merely nodded with half-closed eyes. It is worth noting that your concerns regarding Lethal are warranted. To that end, the director is correct. However, the Emperor will not attempt to retake the planet, Tagge said, implying there would be no further discussion on the matter. We lack the capability in any event, specifically in a system so remote. Audinhone adopted a baffled expression. Sir, the director has made me aware of Admiral Kane's objectives. But what of the other fleets? Surely Lord Vader could not have appropriated every vessel, Walker elicited, gunning right for the point. He noticed the Viceroy spin slowly toward him, but chose to ignore any other moves or expressions the man may have adopted. Coburn chirped a slight laugh as he tried with his might to quell. I told you he was forthright, Cassio. General Tagge let a slim smile betray him and covered his mouth quickly with his hand. I can most certainly appreciate that. He turned fully toward Audinhone, shifting his hand to pinch his chin between his thumb and index finger. I have given Lord Vader an essential free rein over the ship assignments, Deputy Director. He has been able to flush out and destroy a great deal of insurgents, collaborators, and known rebels, he finished, leaning forward. Audinhone could do nothing to hide his shock. Lord Vader reports to you, sir? The words felt awkward and weak. Since Simoon, yes. The raspy voice of the Viceroy answered, Walker's eyes still locked on the Grand Admiral, ignoring the Viceroy's comment. That will remain the case until our Emperor decides otherwise, Tagge said as he crossed his arms before his chest and straightened his back in the chair. Audinhone accepted the response and decided to push forward with his questions to regain control of the conversation to his liking. What of Raeda? A meaningless moon that we utilized years ago, Grijatis rasped. With all due respect, Viceroy, you may be able to dismiss information, but I am not, nor will I accept an alternative where I must. Now, what of Raeda? Walker Audinhone felt the words echo through his head, knowing they had their intended effect. He watched as both the general and director nodded to one another. There was an incident on Raeda which took place almost 16 years ago, involving the same individuals you were able to identify earlier today. The incident itself resulted in the death of an Inquisitor at the hands of Ahsoka Tano. Director Coburn spoke to the question before the Viceroy could intervene. Captain Miara Larte's first adopted home, Grand General Tagge added. Audinhone contorted his face into a dumbfounded expression. Our files suggest she is Alderaanian. Not by birth, Audi, nor was she born of Raeda, but that is neither here nor there. We believe its current importance could be a harborage for a group of insurgents, including but not limited to Captain Larte, Kino escapees, and quite possibly Tano. Coburn managed without running out of breath or wheezing. Ahsoka Tano? Audinhone repeated the name a few times to make a connection, his gaze cast toward his boots. He knew he had heard the name in the past and tried to remain objective with all his ability to disconnect that past from his finding earlier today. A holovid. He remembered a holovid captured several months past. Narshada, he mumbled as he looked directly through the three men. Precisely, Deputy Director, the Viceroy rasped, calling Audinhone's attention to the sickly-looking man. I can understand Lord Vader's imperative then, he paused, remembering the graphic video. She was presumed dead within the debris and rubble of Lord Vader's citadel on Mustafar just 6 months prior. However, we have been unable to recover the body, General Tagge added. Audinhone beginning to feel weak at the knees. What is the point of acting on intelligence when even a deputy director is so far out of the loop, he thought. He raised his hand before all three of the other men as he fought back a sudden wave of nausea. He suddenly realized he had no more to say, feeling as though he had done nothing but waste his time for the last 10 years of his life. Let us come to the ultimate point, Deputy Audinhone. We would like to appoint you to fill the duties of ISB Director. Barton has fully endorsed you, Grand Admiral Tagge began but was cut off. Providing you complete an assignment laid before you presently, Viceroy Grijatis added with a little more life in his voice. Audi, hunt down that signal trace and dig into any implications Raeda may possess, the director said with a certain measure of pride in his voice. I will require Lieutenant Sigurn to assist, Walker said hesitantly. Done, Tagge added. What is available? Tagge's headshake silenced Audinhone. Captain, Tagge said. Deputy Director, as your troublesome findings this morning would suggest, we are all operating under the impression that the entire Imperial network is compromised fully at this time. Another voice crackled in over the comm device built into the director's desk. You'll be operating off grid, so to speak, Audie, Coburn added, utilizing non military assets. As of this moment, Deputy Director Audenhone, you are granted top clearance and will be given full merits and status in accordance with that of the ISB Director. Grand General Tagge continued the deluge. We have a shuttle waiting for you on Pad 8. We will proceed when you are ready, the comm voice added. What? Where am I going? Audenhone asked, knowing the question sounded stupid. Vicidius, the comm voice answered immediately. What the hell is going on? Walker Audenhone thought to himself, wondering what he had gotten himself into.